Good day, everyone, and welcome to our webcast series, Mainstream Wastewater Nitrogen Removal using Partial Denitrification Anammox, or PdNA. And you'll be hearing that acronym a lot today. Today's webcast is part one of a two-part webcast series on this topic. And we're calling our part one of this series, What is PdNA, and is my facility a good candidate for it? My name is Jeff Moeller. I'm a Director of Research Services at the Water Research Foundation, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's webcast. I'm going to briefly go over a few housekeeping items as well as the agenda, and then we'll dive into our program for today. Today's webcast will be about 90 minutes in length, including our Q&A session at the very end. In terms of housekeeping, please submit questions through the question box at any time. We'll do a Q&A at the end of the presentation, so please keep the questions coming throughout the webcast. Slides and a recording of the webcast will be available at waterrf.org. You can download the slides now and access the link to the project page under the event resources at the bottom left of your screen. So those resources are available to you now. Certificate of completion will be automatically generated after the webcast. If you have any questions on that, you can contact Michelle Suazo at the email address shown on your screen there. And then lastly, we'd encourage you to stay until the end to fill out a quick survey with your feedback. Here's a look at today's agenda. I'll be kicking things off with a very brief introduction of a recently completed Water Research Foundation project that is the basis of this webcast series. That's WRF Project 5095, Mainstream Deammonification with Biological Phosphorus Removal. And then we'll have two primary speakers today. They'll be talking about 25-30 minutes each. First, we'll have Stephanie Klaus from Hampton Roads Sanitation District. And Stephanie's going to be discussing the evolution of shortcut nitrogen removal, in particular, taking us on a journey of how we arrived at our current understanding of PdNA through the lens of work that's been completed by HRSD and DC Water in particular. And then Chris DeBarbadillo from Black & Veatch will discuss determining whether your facility is a good candidate for PdNA, which will feature key findings and practical guidance that's been developed from the WRF Project 5095 that I mentioned, as well as some other ongoing WRF research. And then at the very end, we'll have about 20 or 25 minutes for a Q&A panel session that will include Stephanie and Chris, as well as Mike Parsons from Hampton Roads Sanitation District will be joining us. Unfortunately, Ahmed Alamari from Brown and Caldwell had a conflict come up and will be unable to join us for the panel discussion. Here's a look at today's presenters, along with their contact information, should you wish to follow up with any of them after the webcast. In addition to myself, Stephanie Klaus from Hampton Roads Sanitation District is a treatment process engineer there, and she's also a co-PI on WRF Project 5095 that I mentioned previously. And Chris DeBarbadillo, a plant optimization and practice leader and as well as client director at Black & Veatch, also a member of the 5095 project team, as well as a co-PI on another WRF PdNA research project that Chris will discuss. And then for our panel members, we'll have Mike Parsons, a treatment process engineer at Hampton Roads Sanitation District, join us. And as I mentioned, unfortunately, Ahmed will be unable to join for the panel discussion. Full bios for all of our presenters are available on the bios tab if you want to see more information about our speakers today. And now just a very brief introduction about Project 5095, which is the basis of this webcast series. And WRF Project 5095 is titled Mainstream Deammonification with Biological Phosphorus Removal. And this project was really, I guess, developed with the notion that a lot of water resource recovery facilities around the country are currently facing increasingly stringent nutrient removal regulations. Traditionally, water resource recovery facilities have employed energy-intensive nutrient removal methods that often require costly external carbon sources, as well as operational expenses. However, PdNA with biological phosphorus removal has the potential to achieve low nutrient effluent concentrations, along with reductions in energy, chemical savings, as well as reduced treatment footprint. So the overall goal of this project is to develop proof of principle for different PdNA configurations with the integration of a BioP removal and move PdNA into full-scale applications. Ultimately, implementation of this process can provide significant cost savings for utilities, while also helping them to reduce nutrient discharges into the watershed. Here's a look at the project team for WRF Project 5095. It's a pretty large team. You can see the names of all the different team members shown on your screen there. The team includes representatives from two different utilities, HRSD and DC Water, that are both conducting pilot and full-scale testing, as well as analyses. And then we also have representatives from 3 universities including Columbia University, George Washington, and Northwestern University, which conducted a lot of the lab scale analyses and testing associated with the project. And then we also had 2 consulting firms engaged that included Black & Veatch as well as Brown and Caldwell. The project also included a project advisory committee, which provided technical review throughout the course of the project, as well as an 8-member utility advisory committee, provided a geographically diverse representation of utilities that in particular provided some end user input and practitioner input into the project. And we want to really thank and acknowledge all of our project participants in this project. Lastly, here's just a quick snapshot of the project. I should note that this is an EPA grant-funded project. The project started September 1st, 2020, and just recently ended April 22nd, 2025. The project had a budget of about $1 million. And the primary product that was produced from this project is this practitioner's blueprint or guidance document that you see on your screen here. And this document is really designed to help pave the way for practitioners to gain a better and deeper understanding of PdNA and how to implement PdNA at full scale based on the demonstrations that have been conducted at HRSD as well as DC Water. The Event Resources tab on your screen has a link to this 5095 project page where you can download this report at no cost. You might need to create a WRF user account if you don't have one already in order to download it, though. So we encourage you to download that report at your convenience if you haven't already. WRF published an interim version of this report in October of 2023. And then we just recently published an updated final version of the report in March of 2025. This updated final version includes updated information related to integrated BioP removal with PdNA, as well as information on the nitrous oxide footprint of these novel VNR processes that were in particular conducted by our university partners, Columbia, as well as Northwestern. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Stephanie Klaus from Hampton Roads Sanitation District.
Okay, today I'm going to be talking about the evolution of shortcut nitrogen removal, how we got here today at partial denitrification anammox. These are slides that I put together with Heidi de Klippelaar from DC Water. So to start out these slides, we're asking the question of how adventurous are you with shortcut nitrogen removal? So if you had to cross this canyon, would you use a bridge, a zip line, or a slack line? So for conventional VNR, we know this is a robust process, well understood kinetics. We know the process controls are implemented and work, and we have safety factors built into infrastructure with volume. So if we're looking at our example, this would probably be the bridge. This would be the safest option. So with shortcut nitrogen removal, the main options that we have are using partial nitritation anammox or PdNA. This is where we stop at nitrite with nitrification and then use anammox to go the rest of the way to nitrogen gas. And then there's PdNA, which is nitrifying 50% of the ammonia fully to nitrate and then reducing that to nitrite for the nitrite and ammonia to be used by anammox. So these are the theoretical benefits, and I'll go more into the benefits later. But you can see that they're actually pretty similar, even though this route looks more of a roundabout way to the nitrite with PdNA. They really actually have similar overall operational cost benefits. So PdNA we would probably view as the slack line, the riskiest option, because it's really difficult to be implemented in a stepwise manner. You kind of have to go all or nothing with NOB out selection. We know how to do NOB out selection, but we still don't know how to do it consistently. This is a similar concept as side stream treatment, and we know that we can get significant cost savings if we can get it to work. But in reality, we haven't really been able to implement mainstream PdNA consistently. So it was really successful in side stream. We went from discovery of anammox to full-scale implementation quite quickly. That's the figure on the left. But it's been slower to go into mainstream. So even though there's been a lot of research in that area, and we can update this graph probably now, there's even more publications, but there's really been limited full-scale applications of mainstream PdNA. On the other hand, PdNA, partial denitrification anammox, is probably more the zip line, like the in-between option. We see that there's really significant operational cost savings, almost the same as PdNA. The recipe is simple. It can be implemented in a stepwise manner. There's a variety of implementation options, and it allows for future innovation. So we'll go on a little bit of the journey today of the research that we did to get to this point. But if PdNA is so easy, then why did it take so long for us to get here? We were really focused on mainstream PdNA for a long time. But if PdNA was the route to go, like why did it take us so long? We've really been researching this. I've been researching this and HRSD and DC water for over a decade. So we really didn't think that anammox would compete with heterotrophs for nitrite. We thought that heterotrophs would take the nitrite to nitrogen gas. We didn't predict that the controls were going to be so easy for partial denite. And I think we were really approaching this from a side stream way of thinking, where we were always doing PdNA, and you don't really do PdNA in side stream. And then it also seems like a compromise to add that little bit of external carbon source that you need to get the partial denitrification. So it felt like a bit of a compromise, even though we learned it's really not. You really get a huge savings from doing mainstream anammox, whether it's PdNA or PdNA. So PdNA provides, it's more robust, almost the same carbon savings and similar upstream capacity savings. And it also doesn't exclude doing PdNA. We'll talk about one of those examples later on. It actually can work hand in hand with PdNA when you're able to do NOB out selection. So this really ended up being, a detour. This was us doing lots of research on doing mainstream PdNA, but then realizing that mainstream PdNA was the most robust and most robust option that still provided the same savings. So we're still able to save carbon, and I'm going to talk a little bit more on the next two slides about exactly how much savings you can expect. And the capacity increase is a big one that I think often gets overlooked when we're looking at mainstream nitrogen removal, how much additional capacity you can get out of your system. This is from a paper by Kester McCullough. This shows these numbers that we saw earlier, the theoretical savings for PNA and PdNA on oxygen and carbon of 60%, 100%, 50%, 80%. These theoretical savings are all the way to the left of this figure. This is the fraction of nitrogen that you remove with influent COD. So when we're talking, a lot of times when we show these theoretical benefits, it's assuming that you didn't remove any nitrogen with your influent carbon. Now, we know that in practice, that's rarely the case, right? Like we have an MLE process or a 5-stage process where we want to remove nitrogen using that influent carbon. So in that case, the benefit that you actually get is really on this spectrum between conventional nitrite shunt, PdNA, and PNA. All the way over to the right, where if it was possible to remove all influent nitrogen using only influent carbon, then all of these processes, the efficiency actually converges. The same is true for alkalinity savings. It's really on the spectrum, and that's another additional benefit of not having to nitrify the ammonia using AOB, instead using anammox, which don't consume alkalinity. And then lastly, this graph on the right is a pretty simple graph. It is intuitive, but the more ammonia that you can bleed through your system, the lower your SRT can be. So this is just showing the benefit of if I can remove 5, 10 milligrams per liter of ammonia through the anammox pathway, and you can bleed that out of a secondary process to, say, a tertiary anammox process, then your SRT can be much lower. And then that means that you have increased capacity in your system. So here's the overall research timeline. Now, there's other groups working on this, but this is, between HRSD and DC Water, we've had, over a decade of collaborative research on this topic. So we started out around like 2010, 2012 with our mainstream anammox pilots. At Liz pilot at HRSD, we were running a AB process with an anammox polishing reactor. So we noticed that we were getting quite a bit of nitrate reduction in the anammox MBBR. And at the time, we didn't even think about like endogenous denitrification or anything happening there, or if it was due to heterotrophs. So we started to look more into that. At the time, there was also talk of like anammox having an alternative metabolism. We weren't sure, but once we started looking into this, and then we became confident that we were able to remove some nitrate here, and we started adding some acetate, and we started getting some ammonia removal to go along with that nitrate removal there. Again, we only added a very little bit of carbon because we were very concerned about just turning it into a full denitrification reactor. We didn't trust at the time that anammox would be able to compete. Also during this time, we developed the AVN controller. So this is controlling the ratio of NOx to ammonia coming out of the B stage process. This leads to the possibility for NOB out selection with intermittent aeration, but most importantly, it's important we need to control that ratio of NOx to ammonia going into a tertiary process or going into the anammox process, so that you have the right ratio of nitrate going to nitrite and have that right ratio of nitrite to ammonia for anammox. At the same time, DC Water was experimenting with using screens to retain anammox. So this would be bioaugmenting from the anammox granules from the Demon process to the mainstream. And they did find success with using bioaugmentation, but both pilots have now transitioned to using media in a confined zone instead of having the anammox granules moving through the whole system. So next, we were really looking at the mechanistic learnings that we could study through the two pilots. only thing I really wanted to point out here was that this is at the Cheslett HRSD's pilot. This little red arrow is showing how little ammonia we were removing at that time. So again, we just were really nervous about pushing it. And we were also trying to look at how much of the work was being done by anammox and how much was being done at heterotrophs. And we were just really unsure at this time. DC Water was doing some bench scale kinetic studies. So they found that all carbon sources, glycerol, acid, acetate, glycerol, and methanol, could support PdNA as long as the nitrite sink was high enough. So as long as anammox, or this stands for anaerobic ammonia oxidizing bacteria, same as anammox, is high enough. And they also found that the C to N ratio did not control partial denitrification, which I think was interesting. That was another interesting finding that we weren't expecting. There's a lot in the literature talking about the C to N ratio, higher N ratios creating more full denitrification. In these tests, you can see what we found with that first two, the top two graphs and the next two down, with the C to N of 3 and the C to N of 10. Regardless of how much carbon we were dosing, you can see that the nitrite accumulates in red up to a point. So in blue, the nitrate is coming down right until nitrate hits this spot of 2 milligrams per liter. And that was repeatable in both tests. So it didn't matter how much carbon you were adding, nitrate came down and nitrite accumulated until nitrate gets below 2 milligrams per liter, and then nitrite starts to be reduced. And then in the bottom two graphs, that's once anammox is present, and as long as anammox rates are higher and there's excess anammox activity, then nitrite doesn't accumulate, and nitrate just continues to be reduced. So that led to our partial denitrification control logic that we used both at DC Water and HRSD. It was pretty straightforward. We just set a nitrate residual set point. So we just do feedback control. So we have a nitrate set point, dose carbon to meet that nitrate set point. In some of our full-scale applications, we use a feed-forward feedback controller. But the goal is just to keep enough nitrate around. So that ended up being much simpler than we thought it was going to be. And yeah, we found that this keeps the rates high. And the note here below about the electron transport chain is just discussing how with some carbon sources, that's one of the mechanisms that work. So it's just we get PdN until nitrate gets below a certain level. Some more results from DC Water showed that in their PdN zone, they were accumulating nitrite in this PdN zone because they didn't have anammox established yet. So then they also had their full denite zone, which they can use to polish any remaining nitrite. That's the orange in phase C. And then finally in phase D, they had anammox activity. And then you can see that red is nitrite, and nitrite stays low throughout the whole process, while ammonia is being removed as well in the PdN zone. Okay, so then we really started looking on, we became very confident at our pilot scale, and we started looking more on technology and full-scale implementation. So here is some photos from the DC Water pilot. And here are the current proven configurations. So with the integrated pre-anoxic IFAS, this has been proven in cases where you have low carbon coming in. So DC Water has CEPT upfront. And so they were able to, with adding an external carbon source in this pre-anoxic zone, prove that there. But it is important to note that we are still working on, or it's still not proven, if it's possible to do PdNA in a pre-anoxic zone using the influent carbon. And the post-polishing was with suspended growth. That was the results that we talked about earlier with DC water, where they were bio-augmenting and retaining granules. And then we've proven the denitrification filter tertiary application through pilot and also through full scale, and then also a polishing MBBR through lots of piloting. So the key research findings that we found from this phase of study, and I'll go through each one of these. So the PDN selection mechanisms, we translated these to the process control that I mentioned earlier. So it's important to maintain a nitrate residual. For some carbon sources, nitrate reduction is halted as long as enough nitrate is available. So this seems to be more true for like acetate and glycerol, and maybe a little bit less true for methanol. But yeah, so how much we need that anammox as a competitor, I think, is still up for debate, and seems to be case by case how much nitrite accumulation we get with each one of these carbon sources. The nitrate removal rate. So we want to try to keep nitrate removal rates high. So as nitrate reduction is faster than nitrite reduction, operation at high rates allows for nitrite accumulation. So we're just trying to keep an imbalance between those two rates. So nitrate to nitrite reduction happening faster than nitrite to nitrogen gas, so that you get that nitrite for PdNA. And then having anammox there as a competitor. When enough anammox is present, then it's competing for nitrite. Again, this was, I think, a surprising one that, again, looking back 10 years ago, we really thought that that heterotrophs would outcompete anammox for that nitrite, but that ended up not being true. So how we translate this to the process control, I mentioned already that we do nitrate-based feedback control for carbon dosing, or a feed-forward feedback. We try to avoid over-design of systems to maximize the rates. So you don't want an underloaded system in this case. And then keeping anammox mass high, providing efficient anammox retention. And with media, with plastic media, that's pretty straightforward. With denitrification filters, that might mean changing backwash rates, or making certain process changes to make sure that you're retaining anammox in the system. The carbon sources we can use for PdNA. So we found that a wide variety of carbon sources can be used. Acetate and glycerol are the most efficient in selecting for PDN, but we found that in some of our research, that's not always beneficial. If glycerol or acetate does PDN too well, and you get that nitrite accumulation rate is too fast and anammox can't keep up with it, then you could end up bleeding nitrite out of the system. So we have seen times where you actually don't want that super efficient partial denitrification happening. And methanol seems to be is better at that. You actually get maybe slightly less PDN, but you're getting better removal overall. Because you're not getting that nitrite, you're getting better nitrogen removal overall because you're not getting that nitrite accumulation. Methanol for us is also quite cheap, and we've also seen in a lot of our applications that having that low yield is pretty beneficial when you're looking at biofilm thickness in media. And then DC Water has spent a lot of time looking at fermentate, using that as a carbon source because it's free. So for them, it can be a big benefit if they can use that instead of purchasing an external carbon source. So this is showing the PdN efficiency of some of these different carbon sources that have been tested, and there's a wider variety with methanol and fermentate, but just a reminder that even though some of these partial denitrification efficiencies might seem low, and this is the amount of PdN efficiency is the amount of nitrate that stops at nitrite versus how much ends up as nitrogen gas. So some of these might seem low, but when we're looking at external carbon savings for some of these processes, even sending, even having 40% PdN efficiency actually ends up saving can save a lot of money and capacity on these processes. So I'm not sure if I have anything else to say about this one. This was still showing the difference between keeping the nitrate residual. And I did want to mention that this 2 milligrams per liter is, that number isn't so steadfast. It really varies from system to system. We've run some of our systems as low as a 0.5 nitrate residual. But we do see in every system that there is that switch or that number that we try to stay above with nitrate. And then, just again, trying to manage the denitrification kinetics, and we can do that through setting that that nitrate residual set point. So we can adjust that to try to control the PdN efficiency. These are results from the HRSD pilot, and this is kind of showing how even though methanol didn't have as good a PdN efficiency, it still was comparable when you look at the bottom line, which is actual carbon demand on a TIN removal basis. This is how much COD we're adding per TIN removed, ammonia and nitrite altogether. So this is why for us, we mostly stuck with methanol processes. The different approaches that we've taken for anammox retention is suspended growth. That's the bioaugmentation that DC Water experimented with. It was piloted, but really we have not moved forward with this in any full-scale applications. We really found that we were anammox mass limited. The anammox is also moving around the entire system when we really only need it in the anoxic zone. And it doesn't really allow for this stepwise implementation. So we've mostly gone to mobile IFAS implementations. One thing that DC Water has been looking at is can we use a larger media to minimize head loss? Because whenever we're looking at retrofitting PdNA into a second anoxic zone, you have to think about screening to retain that media, and that can cause that can be significant at some treatment plants. So because of that, we also looked at piloting a fixed film IFAS process in a second anoxic zone, and that we can talk more about that. I'm not going to talk anymore about that pilot, but there were definitely some challenges to doing that, and I think it could still be explored further because the benefits could really be big with that, where you don't have to worry about head loss. You can just drop this module that's made up of fabric sheets. You can just drop that in a second anoxic zone and not have to worry about head loss issues. So I think that is worthy of some more attention. So we do see that it is also really important to have this build up anammox activity in the summer for over the winter. As far as going to colder temperatures, we have operated, the York River treatment plant has been operating partial denitrification anammox since 2019. So we have made it through many winters, and it's just about having that mass there to make it through the winter. As part of this project, we did some process model development, and were able to create a model that mimicked this phenomenon that we saw with the peak of nitrite happening until the nitrate got below a certain level. And that was what this was. Ahmed worked on this. And lastly, this is just a quick slide on what we did full scale at York River. This was converting. We had the previous process was full nitrification, and then followed by full denitrification filters, full nitrification followed by full denitrification. So it was quite an inefficient process, having to add a lot of alkalinity here and a lot of methanol in the night filters. And below, you can see how much methanol we were using. And then we transitioned on the right by just bleeding some ammonia through the BNR process to the PdNA, to the full D-night filters. We started growing anammox there, or maybe anammox was already sort of present. So we really just had to bleed through 1 or 2 milligrams per liter of ammonia there to get anammox going. So that's all we did there. And then we were able to carve out anoxic and anaerobic zones within our BNR process, which made the nitrogen removal even more efficient. We were able to take away that volume because we were able to shift ammonia removal into the tertiary process. Otherwise, we couldn't have taken those zones away. We would have needed it for nitrification capacity. So once we did that, then we were able to save a lot of methanol and also operate at a lower SRT, giving more capacity in the BNR process. So it was a huge chemical savings for us at HRSD in methanol, caustic, ferric, because we were able to start doing BioP once we had that zone once we had that anaerobic zone carved out, and also saving on electricity. And most importantly, it let us defer a $80 million conventional BNR capital project that we had originally planned. So yeah, that is my talk on the background. And next up is, I think this is a good segue into Chris DeBarbadillo's talk, where he's going to talk more about the full-scale implementations.
All right, thanks so much, Stephanie. Moving into the next section here, Stephanie has taken us through the process development timeline and the research that really comprises most of our current understanding of PdNA. And there's a number of benefits, as Stephanie explained. And so really this next section is focusing on how to know whether PdNA could be a sensible fit for your facility, right? You know, there's lots of alternatives for facility upgrades. So how do I know that this, relatively newer process, but that has a lot of benefits, is worth considering for the facility, and to help decide whether or not to go on the ziplining adventure? So as Stephanie already showed, there's a number of benefits. Okay. Sorry, I seem to be having a connection issue. Okay, perfect. So you can hear me even though there's some things I'm not seeing. So sorry about that interruption. I'm not quite sure what happened. Okay. So, so how to determine whether PdNA maybe is a good option for you? So just like any other project, right, you have to begin with the objectives for the project. And so really these are, fairly well established, as already explained, and that's if you're a nitrogen removal facility, whether that be nitrification or total nitrogen removal, PdNA offers you an opportunity for oxygen or energy savings and chemical savings, whether that be carbon or alkalinity. So if one of your objectives is to achieve those things, then potentially PdNA is a fit. And then the other, large kind of category of benefit is capacity enhancement and the potential in capital deferment or reduced aeration basin sizes. So then, moving past that, if my objectives are in alignment, then really, what's the major, kind of practical application perspective to consider? And the bottom line really for that is anammox retention. That's the underlying key to application. As Stephanie explained, the anammox are slow growing. And really all of the work that's been done to date on mainstream anammox processes suggests really that biofilm-based PdNA approaches show the most promise. And so as a result, then, how these facilities look like is, generally we're talking about, at least for the PdNA zone, that we have media, some type of media for the biofilm to grow on. And that might be IFAS media in the activated sludge basin. It could be similar media in an MBBR configuration without suspended growth biosolids, or it could be sand media or a larger biofilter type of media, again, all to support the growth of anammox and retain them within the system. So there's also many familiar configuration options. To be honest, really all of these configurations are not so different from the conventional BNR configurations that we're used to. We're used to aeration basins that are divvied up into aeration and anoxic zones, anaerobic zones as well, if we're trying to achieve biological phosphorus removal. And our conventional processes have post-polishing, whether that be a denitrification filter or a moving bed biofilm reactor. So really, in terms of how these processes look, they look about the same as what we're used to today. Generally, the sequence that has been studied and found successful is they all involve a partial nitrification step where some ammonia is allowed to bleed through along with nitrate and nitrite, followed by a PdNA zone, whether that be an IFAS anoxic zone within the activated sludge basin or a post-polishing configuration. So there's several facilities that we can learn from where full-scale PdNA is being implemented. And so the first one, as Stephanie mentioned, is the York River Treatment Plant, HRSD's York River Plant, where PdNA is being operated in what were conventional denitrification filters, again, for capacity as well as chemical and energy benefits. HRSD also has done quite some work at the James River Treatment Plant, both with integrated PdNA zones in a post-anoxic type of configuration in their existing IFAS plant, as well as tertiary MBBR. HRSD is also upgrading the Nansemond treatment plant, which is a 5-stage BNR configuration that is being retrofitted, as well as some new basins constructed to include post-anoxic PdNA zones after the main aeration zone. Blue Plains is currently under construction for a demonstration train of about 20 MGD, again with a post-anoxic IFAS media type of PdNA zone. All of those facilities stand to gain some capacity benefits as well as chemical and energy savings. The Noman Coal Treatment Plant in Fairfax County, Virginia, had existing tertiary denitrifying MBBR, and over the last several years has conducted a full-scale demonstration to achieve some tertiary PdNA. And so that provides an optimization example. So these are facilities that we can learn from. So taking all of that into consideration, when might PdNA be the right fit for my facility? And so really there's a couple of major scenarios. If you've got an existing facility designed for BOD removal and you have to go to nitrification and nitrogen removal, with PdNA, there's the potential to do all the upgrades within existing basin volume, whether it's a nitrification upgrade or nitrogen removal. The fact that a reduced design SRT can be used for the nitrification step allows some of that basin volume to be used for an anammox, a PdNA zone, to increase capacity as well as the overall ammonia and nitrogen removal. Similarly, if you've got an existing facility designed for nitrogen removal, PdNA offers the potential to expand capacity within that existing basin volume, or to upgrade those basins to achieve lower nitrogen limits, again, within that existing basin volume. If you've got an existing DNR facility that's pursuing additional energy efficiency and chemical independence, PdNA could also be a fit. It's important to note that there's a number of aspects that have to come together for implementation of any process. And so there's really a number of stakeholders that need to be included in the decision process for what are the facility's overall goals, what are the skill sets we have on hand and the overall direction that we need to go for limits, and how best to ensure a best fit. So as part of this WRF project, to help kind of walk people through this planning level decision making, we developed a kind of a decision making flow sheet to try to walk through that process. And so starting in the upper left, some of the key components here are really the first question that we have to ask is ammonia removal required? And if the answer to that question is no, really kind of PdNA is not for you. That's to move on to other alternatives. But if that answer is yes, then there's some options. So the way that the flow sheet is organized is moving down vertically. The left side is really about capacity. And if yes, do you need more basin volume to be able to do that upgrade, or is a process that might get you additional capacity within the same volume worth considering? And if that answer is yes, if that continues on yes, then integrated PdNA, may be a reasonable choice to consider evaluating. So again, this is integrated PdNA being the addition of a PdNA zone with media, in an existing activated sludge basin, making it essentially an IPAS process. So moving across the flow sheet are different levels of nutrient upgrades. So whether capacity is a goal or not, if nitrogen removal, if you're having to upgrade to meet moderate level nutrient limits, say effluent total nitrogen in the range of 5 to 10 milligram per liter, or maybe that's where you're starting and you have to get to very low levels of nitrogen, say 3 or 4 milligram per liter, you move across to answer those questions. So if we're looking at a mid-level nutrient upgrade, then following down, do you need the nutrient upgrade? Can you accomplish it within the existing aeration basins? And then if those answers, And then does the plant have existing deep bed filters? And so depending on the answers to those questions, then sort of steer you toward, could I consider PdNA by retrofitting or changing my operation in the denite filters if I happen to have them? Or do I go towards an integrated PdNA approach in my aeration basins? And then moving to the last section of the graph, of the decision chart, there's more detail for getting to nutrient upgrade to lower levels. And then following through that sequence of questions, again, takes you toward potentially integrated PdNA being an option, or tertiary MBBR or other biofilm process as an option. And again, all with the potential benefit of increasing the capacity as well as reducing chemical consumption and energy. So as part of this project, we were fortunate to have a number of utility collaborators that were kind of in this planning stage where they were starting studies to consider optimization or expansion of their facilities. And so one of these was Hillsborough County, Florida. Kristen Waxman at the time worked with us on this. And so we used the Falkenberg plant as a case study. And so this plant is existing oxidation ditch plant with anaerobic zones. It had deep bed filters. Central Florida is warm, so we're talking warm wastewater temperatures. And they already had to meet Florida AWT limits, so effluent total nitrogen of 3 and total phosphorus of 1. One of the tricky parts here is that really the plant would have to stay in service and achieving their treatment performance while transitioning to some type of PdNA if they were to choose this alternative. But there was, an opportunity to maybe come up with something using the existing facilities. So moving through the kind of the basic questions in the decision-making flow sheet, came up with 2 alternatives. The first one was to retrofit or kind of convert the operation in their existing oxidation ditches to primarily focus on nitrification with AVN control so that we had the right balance of ammonia and nitrate in the secondary effluent. It was also maintaining the anaerobic zones. And so then the secondary effluent would be treated using PdNA in their existing deep bed filters. So that was alternative 1. The second option was to go ahead and retrofit these oxidation ditches into something that looked a little bit more like a 5-stage BNR process. So again, anaerobic zones. In this case, the idea was to split the anaerobic zone effluent in kind of a step feed configuration, where the first large kind of blue aeration cell is where most of the partial nitrification was taking place. So then nitrate and nitrite from that first nitrification step is coming into the red PdNA IFAS zone. And some of the influent via the anaerobic zone was also coming into that zone. So there's ammonia in that stream, providing the ammonia and nitrate needed for PdNA. By adopting a step feed idea, there's carbon in the in that step feed to the PdNA zone, offering an opportunity to minimize the amount of external carbon such as methanol that might need to be added for the partial denitrification. Because this plant had to would have to meet very low limits, additional aeration and another post-anoxic zone for polishing using conventional denitrification were included in the configuration. Then this allowed the filters then to simply be used for effluent TSS removal, as was done in the at the facility over the last number of years. So we said, okay, we've got two potential PdNA application ideas. How do these ideas compare just on a rough big picture basis compared to a status quo alternative of continuing to operate in more or less an AO oxidation ditch type of configuration with polishing filters? And so comparing these, the capacity of that status quo alternative is 12 mgd, the existing plant capacity. It's proven. There's no external carbon addition, but to get more capacity, something else would have to be done. The second option was to go with a full nitrification and denitrification, so push the capacity of those existing oxidation ditches by operating them for full nitrification, and then operating conventional denitrification filters, so starting methanol addition in the filters to achieve all of the nitrogen removal. And so that option allowed for a capacity increase of up to 17 mgd within the existing footprint, but really is quite a substantial external carbon demand and costly to operate that way over the long term. The first of the PdNA alternatives, which in this table is alternative 3, was using the deep bed filters for polishing PdNA. And so, and pushing as much, taking advantage of the SRT reduction that you can get with partial nitrification and operating to maintain an ammonia residual. This had the highest potential capacity increase within those basins, up to perhaps 20 mgd. But some modeling runs, a collaborator, Ahmed El-Omari, did some modeling runs around this, and found that really, that the EBPR performance, the BioP performance, was deteriorating at these higher flows, necessitating some metal salt addition. But by going with PdNA rather than full denitrification, only about a third of the carbon dose to the filters would be needed. This alternative does require good controls. And then the final alternative is the integrated PdNA. So modified 5-stage BNR with a post-anoxic PdNA zone, as shown earlier. And this still had a substantial potential for capacity increase to perhaps 18 mgd, but it's by far the most intrusive construction project of taking these basins out of service to modify the existing oxidation ditches would require some serious consideration to the construction sequencing and maintenance of plant operations. However, this alternative really only required a minor external carbon demand and had better EBPR. So this is all in Chapter 4 of the WRF report for 5095, and there's more detail there for those who are interested. So moving on to, okay, so now PdNA seems like, maybe it could be a fit for the facility, but what are some of the challenges and where are we still learning? And so one of those, there's a question that comes up over and over again is, pertains to biological complexity. We have multiple microorganisms all providing different functions. We kind of need them all doing what we want them to do to get the desired result. But it's probably worth noting that all of our nutrient removal processes, all of our biological processes are a consortium of microorganisms anyway. So while there's more to do here, it's not completely a new thing beyond how many of our conventional processes have been developed to date anyway. And so we've got the ammonia oxidizing bacteria, and they really are key to the process. We've got to convert some of the ammonia to nitrite and probably eventually nitrate. But as Stephanie explained in more detail earlier, the kinetics are quite favorable when we're operating with an ammonia residual that can then be taken up by the anammox. Then you've got the nitrite oxidizing bacteria, the NOBs. They're competing against the anammox for nitrite. But one of the why PdNA even became something was further developed is that it avoids the need to try to out-select nitrite oxidizing bacteria. In fact, we're okay with fully nitrifying because partial denitrification from nitrate to nitrite is far easier to control. With the anammox, yes, they're slow growing, but they're robust. And so if we've got a good retention strategy and enough substrate, they've got to have ammonia and nitrite, then they will proliferate. The heterotrophic organisms, I have a typographical error here. They compete for nitrite, is what we meant to say, not so much the carbon, although they grow using carbon. We have a need here to manage carbon feed streams and make sure that we've got some carbon where we need it in that PdNA zone, and without potentially overdosing, so that we can get the maximum benefit. Phosphorus accumulating organisms and glycogen accumulating organisms. Research is ongoing, integrating BioP with PdNA, but all accounts so far suggest that they're compatible. We can maintain good BioP with PdNA, and in fact, these growth mechanisms may be synergistic with PdNA anyway, because of the carbon storage mechanism that these groups of organisms provide. And then finally, the function of these groups of organisms are managed by the environmental conditions, and really the configurations and management of the reactor conditions. While there's a little bit more to do, it's still relatively similar to conventional multi-stage systems. So the next set of challenges really are around online controls, analyzers and controls, and then redundancy and reliability. And so really, to get the most out of PdNA, we do need good analyzers, and we do need control systems that are working. This is something that some utilities have been able to and have operated for a number of years using DO control, controlling airflow to maintain a DO set point. Other facilities are using ammonia-based aeration control. Conventional tertiary denitrification facilities already use automated controls for carbon feed. And so the biggest trick here, the thing that's new, is controlling the degree of nitrification upstream to maintain the right recipe, the right balance of ammonia and nitrate coming into the PdNA zone. So there is an emphasis there to be able to get the most out of the process. Then moving on to redundancy and reliability, we, on the one hand, for conventional nitrification, for the partial nitrification portion, we're able to reduce safety factor and SRT a little bit because of the kinetic advantage of operating to higher ammonia concentration. But there's also concerns about potential variability in effluent quality at lower SRTs. And so an area of ongoing development is really, what's the balance there? How much safety, how far can we push it to make the process work? But how much safety factor do we need to make sure that the process is working the way we want it to all the time? As Stephanie mentioned earlier, anammox operating strategies during cold temperature periods is another area of continued development, as well as control strategies to ensure that tertiary PdNA, if you've got stringent nutrient limits, that you can really reliably meet those limits. So, okay, so bringing this all to kind of a summary here, applying mainstream PdNA is developing. A great deal of research has gone into understanding how to make the process itself work. The right controls are essential to get the most out of the process. But a key ongoing area is the need to develop and vet practical equipment and system criteria for full-scale application. And so exactly that is the focus of a new WRF project, Project 5183, which is advancing PdNA, full-scale PdNA applications. This project is being led by Ahmed El-Omari, and it's been going for about a year, so we're a little bit less than halfway through. And so under this project, there's some continued research at many of the facilities that have been mentioned already in the presentation, and documentation of full-scale operating results and different trials and tribulations associated with that. But key to this effort is development of comprehensive design and operations guidance tools so that we can take the effort that's included in the guidance document of the WRF project that's being presented today and take that to the next step so that there's a practitioner tool out there that provides design guidance to help with application. And so under Project 5183, we've got a number of partners, university consulting firms, and utilities across the country, all with some similar and some differing goals. And one of the key tasks is, as I mentioned, the development of the design criteria fact sheets. This is underway. And so what this includes is review of reactor design criteria. All of these configurations so far include media of some sort, so media design, how best to do that, head loss management, how to keep the media clean, so shearing and biofilm control. Then there's the AVN and carbon controls, choosing the right carbon source and how to design around that, since there's some differences in how they perform in these systems, seeding and startup requirements, effluent quality and modeling parameters. And so the idea is to have some concise design criteria sheets that summarize kind of the bottom line for each of these areas to put forward to try to advance things further. So with that wraps up what we've got in this section, and I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Jeff to move into the Q&A.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Stephanie, as well. We really appreciate both of you sharing all of this information with us. Everything from the evolution of shortcut nitrogen removal, including PdNA, taking us on that journey of how we've come to understand what we do about PdNA now, onto more practical considerations of whether your facility is a good candidate for PdNA or not, including guidance for implementation, and including many of the results from the WRF report, 5095 project, Mainstream Deammonification with Biological Phosphorus Removal. So now we're going to move on to a panel discussion and Q&A. I'd like to invite all of our speakers to turn on their cameras and unmute their microphones. And in addition to Stephanie and Chris, we've got Mike Parsons from HRSD joining us. And I mentioned earlier that Ahmed, unfortunately, Ahmed El-Omari from Brown Caldwell has a conflict, won't be able to join. We've had a number of questions come in already, and want to encourage everybody to continue to submit your questions through the question box on your screen. Any questions that were spurred by the presentations you just heard, or maybe that are just on PdNA in general that you would like to have answered. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that have come in. We've got one question that's come in that says, can you talk about feed forward and how that is implemented? And Stephanie, I was wondering if you might be willing to take that one on.
Sure. So yeah, I think this was in reference to I mentioned the feed forward feedback carbon dosing controller. This is on the York River denitrification filters as an example. So there we measure the nitrate coming in to the filter, and then we multiply by by some sort of dosing factor, usually the stoichiometry, the theoretical stoichiometry for methanol, which is like 4.8 grams of COD per gram of nitrate. So that's the feed forward component. We have the incoming nitrate concentration multiplied by the stoichiometric carbon dose. And then there's a feedback trim based on the effluent NOx or nitrate value. So that's how that controller works. Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was going to say, we don't do that everywhere. It's only where it's really needed. So James River, we have an MBBR, it's completely mixed. We're just doing feedback there. But since York River plug flow, and there's about an hour, we'll say, delay from the time where you feed methanol to the time you get a result back. So that's why we're doing the feed forward, feedback. And on the feed forward, the seed in we're feeding would be a 3.0, assuming like a PdN efficiency of like 50%.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We had a question come in from New York City. Can nitrate accumulation inhibit anammox activity as well? I don't know, Stephanie, you want to take that?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take this one. So can nitrite accumulation inhibit anammox as well? It can under side stream conditions at really high ammonia concentrations. It's possible to get nitrite high enough to inhibit anammox activity, but not typically in the concentrations that we see in mainstream. So it's not really a consideration for mainstream PdNA. And then also the nice thing about PdNA versus PNA is it is easier to control that amount of nitrite. So in the side stream, when we're doing PNA, we're just relying on aeration control to convert that ammonia to nitrite, and it's easy for nitrite to get out of hand. But in the mainstream, if we cut off, carbon dosing or turn down carbon dosing, we would immediately see that decrease in nitrite. So we have the concentrations are low and we have good control over it.
Thank you. We had another question come in, this one from San Antonio, asks, how exactly can PdNA defer conventional expansion projects? And do state regulators accept it as alternative treatment, or do we need to do pilot testing? And Mike, I don't know if you'd be willing to address that question.
I can address part of it, or try to address part of it. At York River, we had an existing denite filter, full denite, and we just changed the upstream AVN and converted it into a PdNA filter. And we just did it. At James River, we're also what we did, went to a 5-stage, put IFAS median in a second anoxic zone, and then we're also building the MBBR there. But as far as who approves what, I'm not the right person to ask that question to.
And then
I could probably.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Chris. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say I could probably add. I mean, usually each state, with new technologies, there's a process to go through. Especially for the first one, providing information and doing the due diligence to show the regulators that the process is viable in order to get like a certificate to construct.
And I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to say further on that first part of that question. How exactly can PdNA defer conventional expansion projects? I know Stephanie gave a good example there. I think that was York River, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was an $80 million expansion project avoided.
That avoided, we were going to build 6 more aeration tanks. But since we're able to shift that ammonia load downstream into the filter, we avoided that big capital project. So yes.
Okay, and next question here, also from San Antonio, is can IFAS work with mechanically aerated systems or only diffused air? Mike, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
I'd have to see what they mean by mechanically diffused. I think of small communities and those surface aerators, which sounds like it'd be really hard on the media. We did it at a small plant. I don't know if I'd recommend that, but is that what you're asking?
Yeah, it says, can IFAS work with mechanically aerated systems or only diffused air? Yeah.
So that sounds like he's talking about the aerobic zone. In the anoxic zone, we have mechanical mixers, and that's what we're using there.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any full scale, IFAS plants that use anything. Yeah, I mean, mechanical aerator, you'd be kind of throwing, if it was moving media, you'd be throwing the media all over the place. So yeah, they're not super compatible.
But yeah, I think in this case, we're just focusing on IFAS in the PdNA zone, which is anoxic, which that does have its own mixing considerations. Actually, in that case, we are using mechanical mixers, but there are things to consider there. With it's easier to keep the media mixed probably in aerobic zone with diffuse aeration. There's a little more thought that needs to go into mixing in the PdNA zone, I'd say.
We have a question in from Johnson County asking how is PdNA applied to existing 3 or 5 stage BNR? Chris, I don't know if you'd be willing to take a crack at that.
Yeah, so if it was a 3-stage BNR, so that's anaerobic, anoxic, and then aerated zone, I guess there'd be 2 options. One would be, you keep that configuration and that you have a tertiary MBBR or denite filters type of process added after the secondary clarifiers, and then operate the upstream basins to allow some ammonia bleed through along with the nitrate to then go to the tertiary process. So that's sort of, akin to the scenario that Mike Parsons has at York River, where, additional capacity really was able to be obtained upstream by virtue of the fact of sending some of that load to the filters. Another option would be to sort of turn that 3-stage BNR into a 5-stage BNR by maybe shortening up the aeration zone, adding in a post-anoxic zone that has media in it that would serve as the PdNA zone, and then having maybe a little re-aeration zone after that, within that, same 3-stage BNR volume. If it's already a 5-stage BNR, then there's already a post-anoxic and re-aeration zone after the main aeration zone. So it'd be a matter of converting that post-anoxic volume, at least a portion of that, with media to create a PdNA zone so the anammox can grow. So I think, yeah.
Thank you. We have another question that has come in from EPA asking, can anyone comment on integrating PdNA with granular sludge operation?
So I think I'm wondering whether that's with granular sludge, if what is meant is kind of densified sludge. So with using hydrocyclones for settling improvements, where we're getting some granules, but maybe it's not huge granules. So that should be feasible. In fact, Mike and Stephanie, does James River still operate with the hydrocyclones? So James River has, in the demonstration, right, you had sort of post-anoxic PdNA zone, and you've had the hydrocyclones being operated all along, if I'm right.
Well, no reason you couldn't combine those 2 technologies. But if they're talking about a hydrocyclone to retain anammox, I don't know if that would get you the highest anammox activity versus the media. We've seen more activity on the media when you have a fixed film.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, so that was sort of the DC water scenario. So, yeah, so if it's granular activated sludge with hydrocyclones for the purpose of conventional activated sludge settling improvements, and just being able to implement, to add a PdNA zone to whatever that configuration is, that should be complementary, although there's not a lot of experience maybe doing it at full scale, except Mike, I think at James, with the IFAS. But if we're growing anammox in granules, and the hydrocyclone is the anammox retention mechanism, as Mike mentioned, yeah, there's some efficiency concerns, as well as the point that Stephanie made earlier when she was talking about the DC Water work. The initial scheme at DC Water was to seed from the side stream anammox facility that had anammox granules, bring that into Mainstream, and to potentially get Mainstream deammonification that way. But really, those granules are spending a lot of time not in an anoxic zone, not in the environment that they need to be to get deammonification. So it was a less than optimal option.
Okay, we have another question that's come in from California. This one asks, are full-scale PdNA infrastructure options licensed or proprietary? In other words, hypothetically, could any utility implement PdNA using their own means to retain anammox, or is the concept itself patented?
Chris, I mean, I can answer this partially, I think, but I'm not entirely sure. The concept, I know I can say the concept itself is not patented. I don't know about any of the controls or other portions, but as far as I know, the answer is yes. But Chris, let me know if you know differently.
Well, so I'm not fully sure either. So I guess to maybe answer what I do know is there are several patents that have been filed for over the years. Some have been granted and some have not. The biological process itself, I believe, is that's itself not, but that some of the controls are. But I think to give a better answer, we would need to come back around to follow up on this question. We're not the best ones to answer the question, I think.
Okay, thanks. We have a question that came in, which asks, it says most case studies are IFAS and activated sludge with filters. Can a plant with existing MBBR, 2 zones with BOD removal, then nitrification, be converted into PdNA MBBR? First zone, similar to AVN, and second zone PdNA with supplementary carbon dosing, assuming the tank volume is sufficient. Sorry, it's kind of a long question, but let me know if you want me to read it.
Mike, do you want to take that one?
I was trying to read some of the details, but the way I think about it, if you can retain anammox and you have a nitrate residual, yes. Without getting into the weeds on what their plant exactly looks like.
Yes, it's feasible. We have a question coming in actually from an industrial manufacturer. Do you think PdNA would be applicable for an industrial wastewater treatment system treating amine compounds?
Chris, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, do you want to have anything?
Well, I think potentially yes, subject to treatability studies. So there's really, right, we have to get whatever the original waste compounds are to the form of ammonia to be able to, kind of go through the process sequence here. But maybe.
Okay. We have a question that came in, asks, is it always necessary to include carbon dosing, or is it possible to convert an MLE to PdNA just to get the benefits of lower energy and SRT?
Mike, do you want to take that, or do you want one of us to?
I guess it depends. I mean, you don't want excessive carb. Back to the point, you need a way to retain anammox and also a nitrate residual. If you have too much carbon around and there's no nitrate residual, you're probably not going to get good PDN. But if you can get good PdN, let's say, I mean, we've got a little bit of like step feeding primary or properly controlled. Yeah, it's possible. It's just you got to maintain a nitrate residual to get that PdN.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question coming in from California. Was the PdNA process operated in one stage or two stages?
I can take this one. So it's always operated in one stage. You have to think about it a little bit differently though, from like two-stage partial nitration anammox, because in this case, it's technically always a two-stage process in that we need to do the nitrification and the PdNA separately. So the nitrification is always happening in a separate zone. We're not trying to do nitrification and PdNA all in one zone. So that's two stages. Oh, good. But then
sorry, I'll hold my comment. I should have held it. Keep going.
Oh, it's okay. But then so in these examples, we're doing that's two stages. But then do we ever do the partial denitrification and anammox in two separate stages? We found that that's not beneficial to do that, because then you're accumulating nitrite separately, and it's actually important for the anammox to be in the film with the nitrite accumulation. Go ahead, Mike. What are you going to say?
Unless you're an SBR, right? I mean, for an SBR, you could do that all in one reactor.
Yes.
And I think maybe we have time for one more question, and then I think we'll need to wrap up. We're getting close to the half hour here. We had a question come in from California, asks, sorry if I missed this, but do we know whether the type of anammox active in PdNA are the same as the organisms in side stream? Has HRSD or DC Water compared sequencing data between your side stream anammox and your mainstream anammox?
Yes. Everything that I've seen, York River, James River, side stream, mainstream is all the same anammox.
I'm glad you remembered that, because I couldn't remember.
Yep. We have one last question. We won't answer it here, but I think it's a good segue for our part 2 of our webcast series on this. We have a question that says, what strategies do you use to avoid N2O emissions during the PdNA process, and have you measured its production experimentally? So we'll be covering that in part 2. In particular, Dr. Kartik Chandran, who's at Columbia University, has been doing a lot of research on the nitrous oxide footprint of shortcut nitrogen removal, including PdNA. So nice segue. Let me just put this up, this slide up, our acknowledgement and disclaimer, just to note that this publication that was 5095, Mainstream Deammonification with Biological Phosphorus Removal, was developed under assistance with an award from US EPA to the Water Research Foundation. Has not formally been reviewed by EPA. The views expressed in this document are solely those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect those of the agency. So I would say that this concludes our webcast for today. I want to thank everyone for participating in part 1 of this webcast series. Special thanks to our presenters today, Chris and Stephanie, as well as to Mike for participating on our panel and helping answer all of your questions. We hope that you'll be able to join us for part 2 of this webcast series on July 22nd, 2025. And that part 2 will be focused on PdNA pilot and full-scale research and future directions. You can register for this webcast on the WRF website. You see our web address there, waterf.org. I think this webcast, this next one, will be of particular interest to scientists, engineers, and practitioners that are particularly interested in new PdNA research and future directions for PdNA. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. Last thing I'll mention, it was one of the other questions that came in, asking if the report, 5095 report, is available. And yes, if you go to your event resources tab, you'll see a link to the project page, and you can go to that project page and download the final report. You may have to create a WRF account to do so, but you can do so for free at no cost and download the report for more information. Also, if you have any follow-up questions, you can download the slides, and we have our presenter contact information in those slides, and hopefully they're amenable to having you follow up with some questions. But thank you all again for participating, and this concludes our webcast.